who's to blame for the chaos on Spain's border. Last week, some 60,000 migrants from Morocco streamed into this tiny Spanish territory in North Africa that's known as Ceuta. Now, at this point, most of the migrants have returned home, and the immediate crisis has calmed down. But the political story has not. European governments are now holding emergency talks after the situation in Ceuta ignited fresh immigration debates across Europe. The story has traveled around the world. And just the other day, here in the United States, President Trump spoke of Spain as a cautionary tale of what could happen here if Democrats win control in the midterms. From the BBC, I'm Asma Khalid, and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube.
My name is Sarah Rainsford, and I'm the BBC's Southern and Eastern Europe correspondent.
Sarah, we have seen some of the images, some of the footage of tens and tens of thousands of migrants from Morocco appearing to rush the border to enter into this Spanish territory. Can you explain what exactly happened? This was last Thursday. How did the scene unfold?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because I think until this time, we still don't really know exactly what happened and why. So the first images I saw were posted, in fact, in Italy by the government, and they were pictures of a group of, I'd say, hundreds at that point, of mainly young men rushing through the streets of Ceuta, which is a Spanish territory in North Africa.
So it's a Spanish territory on the continent of Africa.
That's right, yeah. It's just a small kind of tip of Morocco, which belongs essentially to Spain. And what transpired was a huge number of people all at once getting around the border between Morocco and Ceuta, so from Morocco into Spanish territory, by getting very close to the border fence and then following it out to sea. So that the border is a sea border, essentially. It's a fence, and then the fence goes out to sea.
And so you have to swim to come
You have to swim. And it's a well-known route for migrants who are trying to get to Europe. But what was happening on Thursday morning in particular was that people were somehow able to get right up to the border fence and then to sort of walk out onto the rocks and go down to the jetty and swim a pretty short distance to get from the Moroccan side onto the Spanish side, Ceuta. And then what we saw was this sea of inflatable rings and flippers and people's shoes just abandoned on the beaches, wetsuits as well, pieces of clothing, as thousands and thousands and more people during the day began to come to shore. And you could see them, lots of them exuberant, really happy, excited, running up to TV cameras, making V signs for victory, saying Viva España, extremely happy apparently to have made it to Spanish territory. By the end of the day, the authorities in Ceuta were saying around about 60,000 people had actually made that crossing. So really, really unusual and really striking scenes. And still quite mysterious, frankly, as to how exactly that transpired.
You mentioned that 60,000 people were able to enter in from that Morocco-Ceuta border. But, I mean, Ceuta's tiny, right?
The population is 85,000 normally. Wow. So 50, 60,000 people flooding into Ceuta was really something, obviously for the local population. And I think one thing that's just worth stressing right away is that it seems, from all of the images I was looking at, and I was looking at a lot of them throughout the day, there seemed to be no sign whatsoever of the Moroccan border guards on the Moroccan side of the fence. So you could see some Spanish border guards, and essentially what I saw was them helping people up onto the rocks, helping them out of the sea, because there's nothing much else they could do at that point. But on the Moroccan side, there seemed to be nobody. And that was something that we kind of dug into a bit further as the days went on. And I think that's kind of a key point. You know, where were the Moroccans? There didn't appear to be anyone there stopping them. And reports that we've heard since then have suggested from the migrants themselves that in fact they were even waved towards the border by Moroccan authorities. Now, I haven't spoken to anybody in the Moroccan government officially myself or to any border guards, so I can't confirm that. I didn't see it for myself, but certainly many migrants have talked about essentially being waved through.
And at this point now, there are not additional people coming in from Morocco. My understanding is that, in fact, a number of people have begun returning home.
Well, not just that, actually. Tens of thousands of people returned home within 24 hours.
Within 24 hours.
Yeah, I think that's why this is so extraordinary, because you have a huge number of people crossing the border in unexplained circumstances within 24 hours, and within another 24 hours, they've gone.
There is no opportunity there in Morocco, so that's why I come into here. But also here, I didn't find any opportunity, so I should go back to home.
The vast majority of them have disappeared back to Morocco. The arrangement that Morocco and Spain have about that border is that essentially Spain pushes people back and Morocco takes them back.
Okay.
And if you're a Moroccan who's come over without documents from Morocco, there is no physical way to get from Ceuta to mainland Spain.
I see.
Without being checked by some official, some border authorities. So it's not like you've landed in southern Spain and you can then get on a train or a bus or walk or whatever and go north through France to Britain or wherever. That's not possible.
I want to understand why it was we saw this surge of people move. I mean, this to me is the fundamental question I have yet to really fully understand here in this story. I, of course, know that many people migrate across the world all the time for better economic opportunities. But what you have described the other day was 60,000 people en masse through some sort of, it seems, coordinated effort, or at least coordinated time, simultaneously moving towards Ceuta. And I want to understand why this happened at that particular moment.
I think it's worth mentioning that in the run-up to the day, if you like, Thursday, there had been an increase in the number of people who had been making that journey, but at a very low level. And then in the days before Thursday, there was a significant increase. So enough that it registered, I think, as abnormal and an anomaly on the radar of the authorities in Ceuta. By Thursday afternoon, that's when this huge influx of people began. And that's when there were so many people that people were being crushed on the rocks and people were losing their lives at sea. So there's obviously a trend to it. And I think in answer to all of the questions, one of the key answers is social media. It quite clearly that the migrants who described and explained a little bit about what had happened themselves, all of them talked about seeing posts on social media that telling them that Spain was open, telling them that the border was open, telling them they could get to Ceuta, telling them that they needed to buy flippers and wetsuits, and lots of videos with music of people with selfie sticks filming themselves swimming at sea and pointing towards Ceuta, and then pictures of people, whether they were real or not, I don't know, pictures of people in Ceuta or in mainland Spain saying, essentially presenting this picture, this image of a very easy journey that people should be encouraged to take.
Sarah, do you know who was behind that misinformation campaign?
It's a really good question. I wish I could answer that. Right now, I don't. But I've seen some of the accounts online, particularly on Instagram and on TikTok. They all have a similar name, and they all post very similar images. And most of them are accounts that have only existed for a few weeks, so
that
3
is
or 4
intriguing.
weeks.
Huh.
And they have a lot of likes, so they've got a lot of traction, like tens of thousands of likes. So people were seeing those posts. Who created them? Who kind of who conceived of all of this, whatever this was? That's not clear. I think there's that's something to be investigated and still a very much open question.
Sarah, there's another narrative I have heard that part of this border crisis story is tied to what is perceived by some as a soft touch that Spain's government takes toward immigration, and in particular, a recent ruling from the Spanish Supreme Court. Can you explain that? What was that decision, and why at all would it have been an impetus for Moroccans to come over?
I think those are two separate things. The Spanish court is obviously independent, so that's not the government. But the court made an important ruling not long before this crisis began. The Supreme Court ruled that it was not legal for the Spanish authorities to immediately and automatically push people back to Morocco if they crossed by swimming. It's about not, if they didn't overcome a physical barrier in order to enter a territory, then they couldn't be pushed back behind a barrier because they hadn't crossed one in the first place. So it's a bit complicated, but essentially it was being interpreted as Spain is open. That was false. That was never the
This
the
was how
court's
recent?
ruling.
This was in just
Very recent,
July?
3-4 weeks ago, yeah. But in terms, you asked as well about the government.
Yes, the sort of
policy,
approach that it has a softer touch on immigration and that perhaps that is luring more migrants into Spain. I've certainly heard that narrative as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to those kind of comments and a lot to sort of unpick. I mean, one is that the number of migrants going to Spain has actually fallen recently. So, to argue that there's a pull factor because Spain is soft on migrants, it doesn't really match up with the actual statistics. But it's certainly true that Spain, in the last few months, has initiated a policy whereby it has allowed hundreds of thousands of irregular migrants, so undocumented migrants who are living in Spain currently, people who arrived there before December, to apply for, they call it regularization, but it means basically to get a work permit and a residence permit with some limitations, but still a much better status than being undocumented and unable to work in Spain. So hundreds of thousands of people have applied for that, but it is deeply controversial within Spain, particularly with the right wing, and also within Europe as a whole, where there is a lot of hostility towards too soft, in inverted commas, policies and politics on migration. So I don't think in all of this, I can't believe that any migrant who crossed that border on Thursday into Ceuta was thinking that they were going there to apply for a program to regularize their status in Spain, apart from anything else, because that campaign has already finished. So I don't think there's a direct factor.
It's for people who you were saying were already living in Spain, correct?
Yeah. And also I think what's happened really with that is that what this crisis and particularly the images that were being shared on social media of people rushing across the border, those images have been leapt on by the political class who wants to criticize the Spanish socialist government for its policies. So there's a clear divide in Europe between sort of more lenient and less lenient policy on migration, and those who are less lenient, on the populist right in particular, have jumped on these images to jump on the government of Pedro Sanchez in Spain because his policies were already controversial within Europe.
I do want to ask you about that, but just ever so briefly, Sarah, first, I want to understand this idea of migrants going in from Morocco into Ceuta. You said it was already a known route, and I had heard that a similar surge of migrants entered the territory. It was in 2021, I believe, and it was related to some sort of diplomatic disagreement that Morocco had with Spain. And can you help me understand that?
Yeah, you're right. About 5 years ago, there was a similar incident to what we saw last week, but on a much smaller scale. And on that occasion, around about 8,000 migrants were able to make it through the border en masse, again in a kind of sudden surge. And again, at that point, there were big questions about how that was possible and where the Moroccan border guards vanished to. And at that point, the consensus that Morocco was using that border and the pressure it could exert through that border by essentially allowing people through to pressure Spain over that particular diplomatic and political crisis of that moment.
This time around, have you heard anything from the Moroccan authorities about what might have happened?
I haven't been able to speak to them directly, personally, but the only quotes I've seen have been of the Moroccan authorities blaming criminal gangs. It's also interesting that the Spanish government has been loath to point the finger towards Morocco, and in fact, the government's opponents within Spain have criticised that. But the government has instead stressed that Morocco is an ally of Spain and criticised and blamed people smugglers instead, which is a little bit difficult to understand because I think it's quite clear that there were no smugglers involved because there was no need to pay anybody to take you to the border if you could just walk there yourself. So I don't think this was about smuggling. Yeah, everyone's officially keen to sort of play down the idea that this might have been some kind of hybrid attack by Morocco or some kind of weaponization of migrants by Morocco. But to be honest, the similarities between what happened and what happened back in 2021 are really striking.
At this point, Sarah, most of the migrants, it seems, have actually gone home. But even though the situation, it seems, on the ground has perhaps calmed down somewhat, the border crisis itself did provoke a strong reaction amongst a number of European leaders. It also provoked, I would say, a fairly strong response from the Prime Minister of Spain himself. So let's start there before we move on to the rest of Europe. And what have you heard from the Prime Minister of Spain?
The Spanish Prime Minister was quick to head to Ceuta himself, actually, to be there in person.
Definir lo que ha sucedido.
He called what happened an attack on Spanish sovereignty and on Spanish territory. He blamed smugglers for tricking people. But he also was extremely angry at those within the EU who he felt were exploiting what had happened for their own political gains. He wrote an open letter criticising some in Europe for what he called their selfish response, their political point scoring that he accused them of doing, and a number of other quite strongly worded phrases. I think he felt very quickly under attack from right-wing parties, especially within Europe, but not just the right-wing, others who were critical of Pedro Sanchez.
I mean, it felt like there was pretty unanimously a rather strong critical response in many parts of Europe.
Yeah, I think there was, but I think Pedro Sanchez's kind of question back was kind of like, why is my migration policy to blame for this complete anomaly? How is he was trying to understand, I think, and trying to challenge the idea that the way Spain treats migration could possibly be such a huge pull factor that 60,000 people tried to cross the border in one go. Mm-hmm. I think he was quite clear that this was something
else is going on.
And I think looking at it objectively, he has to be right that this wasn't normal. In any sense, this was not normal.
We have seen a number of European leaders I would say use some strong words and take some rather strong tactics and approaches to how they wanted to respond. What stood out to you from what you saw amongst various European nations?
The Italian government was very quick to talk about what was happening in Ceuta.
And this is the government of Giorgia Meloni, who is known
correct,
to be on the right politically.
Hard right politically, yeah. And her party, Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy, they posted this video, and underneath it said, this is the result of the government of Pedro Sanchez. If you vote for the left in Italy, this is what you're going to get. So they immediately were using those images for domestic political capital. The context of that, which is absolutely critical, is that there is an election next year, and Meloni's coalition has been losing support to a new party on the further right, if you like, further right than hers.
Further right even than her, okay.
And much more virulently anti-immigration and really making that sort of front and centre of their policy. So she is, I think it's clear in this and in other things, is trying to keep those voters in her camp. But also, appealing to a broad spectrum of opinion within Europe, which agrees with her on migration. And she used it to talk about the need for securing our borders, for firmer policies, and to slam the socialist government of Pedro Sanchez in Spain, which is a favoured topic.
Sort of diametrically opposed to her politics. Yeah. They don't see eye to eye on a whole range of topics. I also want to understand what the migrant issue itself looks like in Spain. I was listening to our sister show, the Global News podcast, the other day, and they spoke to Gerald Naus from the European Stability Initiative, who had said that Spain is not the country that actually has the biggest migrant problem in Europe.
It is absolutely ridiculous and completely irrational. Spain has had less arrivals of irregular migrants in the last 3 years than Italy.
I guess I just want to understand, Sarah, because I think that amongst the right, even in the United States, Spain and Pedro Sanchez are seen as being the most problematic nation in the eyes of conservatives here in the U.S. when it comes to migrants.
Okay, I've got the numbers here for this year, and these are from the UN and official tallies. So in terms of the arrivals between January and June this year, down 32% on the same period last year. And the number is around about 12,000 in 6 months.
Okay.
Irregular arrivals
into
in Spain.
Okay.
Yeah. Spain and Italy essentially tackled the same problem, which is the arrival of boats from Africa from various different points on the continent. What's different is the language, the tone, the way that the conversation goes. And it's also important to say that when you're talking about, for example, in Spain, the regularization of huge numbers of migrants, the vast majority of those people, not all of them, but a lot of those people are people who have entered Spain legally with visas to work, usually from Latin America. Spanish speakers, and then have essentially outstayed their visas, stayed on in Spain, become undocumented in that sense, and have now applied to become legal within the continent.
Sarah, our show is about where the world and America meet. And these images, the storylines out of North Africa in the last week, they are being seen as a warning of what could happen here in the U.S. if Republicans don't keep control of government. I mean, it is very clearly being spoken of in this way by the President of the United States.
And I watched the catastrophe that took place. It looks like an invasion of a country by hundreds of thousands of people. And that same thing's going to happen to us if the Republicans don't get elected. Except worse.
You know, Trump, he has long campaigned on tougher immigration. That was, I would say, one of his signature policies when he first ran for the White House in 2016. And we are seeing him see it. He even said himself as a possible talking point that could boost Republicans now. I'm already seeing this story make these political waves here in the United States. How do you interpret that?
I think it's really easy to present a picture and a narrative and then just forget about what the reality is. I mean, the images, for those who want them to, speak for themselves. Lots and lots of people entering without restraint into the EU, effectively. The reality, of course, is that the only reason they entered was not because Spain's migration policy is so lenient, but because somebody let them in. So something happened to allow a huge number of people in for whatever reason. And now that image, which suits a certain political narrative, is being used for that political narrative. You don't need to explain to people what really happened, the full nuances of actually the situation. They will still think there are 60,000 undocumented young men from Morocco within Europe. That's not true. And then on the other side, you have to remember the other part of the politics, which is that Donald Trump isn't very happy with the Spanish government right now for multiple reasons, but primarily because the Spanish government didn't support his war on Iran, and Spain has been very outspoken about what's been happening in Gaza in particular. So Donald Trump is no fan of Pedro Sanchez. He's actually been very outspoken about him and his policies in many senses, and certainly this is feeding into that politics as well. So there's a lot going on.
Important to keep in mind. Yes,
but it's also, I think, it's just that this began on social media, as far as I can tell, and it's being spread on social media, and everyone will take whatever images they want and post whatever they want to beneath it, because people don't dig beneath those images, don't dig beneath the slogans, and that's enough. So the job is done, and the narrative is there that Spain is weak on migration, that border is dangerous, that Europe's external borders are not protected, that Europe is weak, and that Europe is divided, polarized, and fundamentally chaotic. So I think there's a lot of people who potentially stand to gain from that being the case. But I think, you know, it is absolutely intriguing to try at some point to get to the bottom of you know, who it was that sent out the message that this border was open, come across, because I think that's still, you know, not 100% clear yet.
Well, Sarah, thank you for helping us try to dig a little deeper in this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I tried.
That's it for The Global Story on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. And if you appreciated our show today, then I should mention that The Global Story is also available as an audio podcast. So that's right. You can find us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.